Welcome to this very first edition of the Michael Brown podcast on BCR. I've got with me today the founder of the Blue Cell, Todd Mans. Hey, Todd, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Michael. How are you?
Well, I'm doing actually very well. It's I always have this. This is way off topic, but this is kind of usual for the conversations that you and I always have. You know, we're coming up on the Memorial Day weekend, and don't you always find it odd to tell people, hey, have a happy Memorial Day weekend? Because it's actually supposed to be a somber holiday.
That's absolutely right, and it does sound kind of odd, like some of the other things that we do and say, or when you're liking pictures on Facebook, and it's not really a picture you want to like, but you want to acknowledge. I think it's kind of the same thing.
Exactly, you want to acknowledge that you've seen the photograph. Well, anyway, exactly. So just to give people perspective, we're coming out on the Memorial Day weekend. And Todd and I wanted to get this first episode in the can just so that all of your customers and people that might be listening would understand kind of what we're doing. Now, let me just take 2 minutes for those of the audience that don't know who I am. My name's Michael Brown, and I was the first Undersecretary of Homeland Security in the Bush administration. I went to work for President Bush, actually before he was inaugurated, on the campaign, did some volunteer work on the campaign. And then I went to D.C. in January of 2000 as the first, or not as the first, but as the general counsel in the new Bush administration, the general counsel for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And then all of a sudden, a few months later, 9/11 happens. And the next thing I know, I'm the deputy director of FEMA, and then I become the director of FEMA. And then sometime, Todd, you and I should have a conversation or do a podcast about the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, because I was a leader, one of the 4 leaders on the transition team to create the department. So before everybody starts shooting at me or they start screaming and hollering at me, we should tell them that we'll do a podcast so I can tell them everything that I was objecting to when we created the Department of Homeland Security.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's the beauty of the platform. Now you can probably say whatever you want to someone.
I can say anything I want. Exactly. Unlike congressional hearings, and then of course Hurricane Katrina, which unfortunately I'm probably most infamous for, but I've had incredible experience inside the Beltway, working with Congress, working with the president, working with governors all through the state. And my experience in Homeland Security and FEMA was a part of my life that I am absolutely happy that I had the opportunity to serve the country and to do what I did. And to now share that, and in particular to share it on a platform like we have at Blue Cell, and in particular, Bravo Charlie Ready, BCR, which is what BCR stands for. So that's me in like a 60-second spiel. Todd, why don't you tell the audience real quickly about you, and then let's talk about Blue Cell.
Well, absolutely. So I spent some time in the Marine Reserves, and spent some time as a police officer, and spent some time as an emergency manager in Colorado. And about 12 years ago, got into the business of teaching Homeland Security and emergency management topics. And fortunately, now today, as a company, we do business in all 50 states. We do some business out of the country, and I've got a great team, and we have been extremely blessed, really, to have the opportunities that we've had over the time span that the company started in 2009. We do about 200 classes a year, about another 100 exercises a year nationally. And at the Blue Cell, we are always trying to get information in the hands of our customers. So the platforms that we now talk about today are fantastic in terms of podcasts and some other things that, of course, we're going to talk about with our new content and media platform that we're putting together.
So the Blue Cell, first of all, congratulations. You've been in business now for 10 years, which is a really good sign that you're doing something right.
Yeah.
And in fact, let me kind of tweak your memory. You and I were meeting one day, and we were sharing war stories, right. And we were talking about ICS and any number of training programs, and you mentioned that, and names don't make any difference, but somebody that I think maybe was a fire chief or a police chief or maybe an EM, I forget what it was, but they had gone through a lot of the training, but now they were going through one of your courses. And they
Right.
they said something to you that I found absolutely, well, satisfying.
So it was just recently, and I guess I was a little bit surprised too that a pretty high-ranking individual who was a very, very sharp person that we've been working with their agency for a number of years said, "Hey, I've taken all these classes and I just listened to this lecture on Unit 3 or 400, and as I'm considering how I'm going to apply it to a very specific situation, this is the first time I'm feeling like I really understand it." And that's not an uncommon response that we might hear, because certainly with some of the planning work that we do and an incident command, we know that is a significant amount of information that you're trying to take in. And I always equate it to trying to learn a semester and a half of organizational leadership as though you were a junior in college in about 2 days, trying to apply that to a number of different situations. And then in many cases, we're trying to teach that to folks who don't want to hear it to start with. So it's always a challenge to try to bridge that gap between what the book says and what the context is of how it was written, and then turn that into something that you can actually use. So at the Blue Cell, we really try to force multiply our opportunities as trainers, but also looking at exercise, and then also as consultants, we try to pull those things together to make it so that instead of having slides read to you for 2 days, you come away with a couple of concepts, and then we can give you some really practical approaches in how you're going to execute those concepts. So that's one of those interesting stories that, yes, you and I had shared. And believe it or not, it's not an uncommon thing that myself or my trainers would hear on a pretty regular basis as we travel around and do a lot of that training.
Well, that's probably one of the reasons why you've been so successful. And I would just say, as the guy that used to, in an arm's length transaction, hand out the grants and send down the edicts and do all of that stuff in terms of what you're going to have to now do in order to get the money from the feds and what you have to comply with. For you to be able to take all of those things and then give them a practical application, I can tell you, as the former head of FEMA, that even though it's now been, I'm trying to do the calculations in my head, it's now been almost 13 years since I've that distance from being inside the Beltway. One, I'm struck by the fact that that's still an issue, but
Right.
I'm also struck by the fact that you've been able to kind of break down that barrier and accomplish what, because to your point about people, they don't want to be there, they don't want to do that, they're already busy, they already have stuff to do, and so now why do I have to go sit in this classroom when I've got a flood, a fire, I've got whatever the disaster may be, I've got things to do. I don't have time to listen to, or look at a PowerPoint.
Right. That's exactly it. So I always think it's funny when we do talk also, or even when I'm out on my travels. Now I do have the perspective of, I know the guy who created this situation that I'm now in out in the field. It's nice actually to be able to pick up the phone and be mad for a few minutes about it.
Okay, but let's be abundantly clear. It's been 13 years, and so there's got to be some sort of statute of limitations with which you can keep blaming me for everything. You're worse than the New York Times, okay?
That's right.
Worse than the New York Times. But here, in all seriousness, though, I think the point that we joke about is it's been 13 years, but emergency management at its core really is what it's always been. It's about it's about training. It's about responding. It's about recovery. It's about mitigating, before the next disaster occurs. And that cycle is a natural cycle that's always going to exist.
Right. That's exactly right.
So,
And
go ahead.
believe it or not, the work that was done by the administration you're in and the administrations that have followed, it has been positive work, and we will give you a hard time, and it's always easy to point the finger at, oh, somebody's making me do this, but the reality is we are much better off than we were through disasters going over time, and we do see the fruits of that, and it's a long process, and it's an ongoing process, and that's probably one of the big takeaways, and why we stay in the business that we're in, and why we continue to try to change and adapt the business that we're in to today's threats and problems.
Now, before we get to, just so people know kind of where we're going, I eventually want to get to Bravo Charlie Ready,
Okay.
the website, bravocharlieready.com, or you can also get to it by going to thebluecell.com. Before we get to that, though, I got to ask you a question, because while I always found it, generally speaking, easy to work with what I would describe as the career people, the fire chiefs, the police chiefs, the emergency managers, the civil servants. My frustration level usually kind of went through the roof when I had to deal with the elected officials, and they had not been, either they didn't care about emergency management or even Homeland Security, or if they did, they were way too hands-on, so there was never this balance. It was either completely hands-off or micromanaging. In the time that I've been gone, and in the 10 years that you've been doing the Blue Cell and doing the training, do you see that, and I'll just put it in the context of post-Katrina. In the context of post-Katrina, do you find that elected officials are much more open and willing to be trained, to learn, to understand what their role is versus the role of the people that work for them?
I would say that the biggest transition there has been elected officials are probably much more cognizant of the fact that they may need to be ready and may need to go down the path of supporting the emergency manager and the emergency services personnel. At the same time, I'll tell you, most elected officials, in my experience, did not run on the platform, elect me, I'm going to be great in a disaster.
Right.
So since they do have other concerns and challenges and things that are important to them and other priorities, that is always going to, I think, be the case unless you're literally coming off of a disaster and there's a direct result of an election, where things just didn't go exactly right. But that just being cognizant, and some of that's probably social media, some of that is probably the news, some of that's probably the pulp culture that we see with regard to TV shows and talking about disasters. They are much more cognizant of it. And if we can take them just one more step and give them the basics that they need, and understanding that they need to rely on those career service professionals, then I think we can solve that in most disaster situations and be much more successful.
Good for you. Congratulations on that. So let's go to Bravo Charlie Ready. And again,
Okay.
for those of you that want to check it out, you can go to bravocharlieready.com. Tell us what, you reached out to me. Seems like now that you've been around forever, but you and I have,
Right.
you and I have been talking over the past couple of months as you were putting all of this together. What was the concept behind? I mean, you have the Blue Cell, and you're doing the training and the exercises, but you wanted to take everything to a different level. So why and what was that?
So the initial impetus for it was one of my now current contractors came to me and said, I've been sent to a lot of classes, and over that time, I've actually developed a lot of content or information from all of these classes that I've gone to. And I've been trying to figure out a way to just really give that to folks. And that was something that we would always do at the Blue Cell, but we would do it in a classroom setting. So if you came to one of our classes, a lot of times you get a disc or a link to hundreds of files that we had just collected over time. So with this new idea from one of my folks, instead of hundreds of files, we were talking about thousands of files. So the beginning of Bravo Charlie Ready was really a content site that we wanted to put together for customers and be able to simply put information up that they could download that would be somewhat unique. Some of it developed by us, some of it obtained by the Blue Cell. And within about a 3-week period of time, we ended up talking about learning management systems with another firm that's supporting us to put in online training. We already had a few projects like like Studio BCTV, which was a online video version of a classroom setting that we had already tested. We had another product line called TTX Vault, which is where you download exercises. We couple that with our store, the NIM store, and the next thing you know, I've got 7 or 8 elements that really need to be in its own platform. And that platform, as we understand it today, would be Bravo Charlie Ready. We round it out with a message board that we're going to have where folks can talk to each other. And of course, the cherry on top, I think, is the podcast. And that was one of the latter things to develop. As you said, we've been talking for about a month. And it was really a domino effect of things coming together. And when the opportunity came about to have someone with your experience and a few other folks that I'm going to have on specific shows on the podcast, suddenly I have a platform with 9 different areas of that platform that is really designed for emergency managers, emergency service personnel, agency administrators, hospitals, prisons, airports. There is literally something in there for everyone. So we decided to use the initials from the Blue Cell, the B and the C, and a phonetic alphabet, right, with Bravo and Charlie to make up the name, and Ready. And so that's how we put together BravoCharlieReady.com.
Now, when you say there are 9 different areas of content, you just rattled off, airports and hospitals and schools, blah, blah, blah. Were those the areas of content you were talking about, or were you talking about subject matter areas of content?
It's really subject matter, or really from a business perspective, it's product sets.
Okay.
So when we think about an exercise that you can download, that's a specific product set. We also have a simulation site that we've had for years called Chelsea County, USA, that we've used to support our training. It's a fake county, and online you have all of the plans for a fake county, which you certainly could use to work on plans in your own county. But yeah, in all, it ends up as a lot of different service areas or product lines under this one platform. And then within that, disciplines will find things that'll be of interest to them and that type of thing.
I think it's a great concept, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. Again, going back to it's interesting working with you, because you and I together, we kind of cross that spectrum of what the roles and responsibilities are, and I think by putting these podcasts out there, we might tell people right off the bat that the schedule. Why don't you just do that? Why don't you tell people what you anticipate the podcast schedule to be on Bravo Charlie Ready?
Yeah, so we're gonna, I think, take on a little bit of an ambitious approach with regard to the podcast specifically, because in my mind, I was thinking that I really needed or wanted to share different information in the format of really different shows. So within the Blue Cell, I've got some very talented folks, and one of those folks is a guy by the name of Pat Gertis, who is really a technology guy. And he kind of came to mind almost right away that the things that he might want to talk about on a Sunday night for the technology show would be maybe very specific in still the emergency services realm, but really a technology based show. Another one of my folks out on the West Coast, Jessica LaBerge, has been with us for a number of years. She's a all hazards really expert from the perspective of emergency management and being on incident management teams. And so we wanted to specifically do an all hazards show, and that might be a heavily interview show, I think, where she's talking to folks that she knows and can get in contact with around the country. We always have to remember that all of these things don't happen in the Beltway and in Chicago and LA and Philadelphia and New York. So I specifically wanted to have a rural preparedness show. And Denise out of Nebraska is going to lead that rural show. And then certainly I would consider you our headliner with your experience and things that you've talked about, and really your abilities in media to handle a more international and national show. So as it lays out in a week's time, I think the rural show will be on Saturday. I think the all hazard show will be a little earlier in the week. We'd like to put your show on towards the end of the week and kind of maybe recap some things that are happening around the country and around the world. And the other thing that I think will be very powerful, especially for the subscribers to the entire platform, we will take that concept and add to it the supportive content, or a exercise specifically, or an article, so that we have some consistency in the information that folks can find, or they can pinpoint and go to very specific information that they might be looking for. But we're looking at 4 shows a week, and then for sure a video show once a week with you, Michael. And that's kind of the idea of the programming for BCR Pod.
And all of that will be at BravoCharlieReady.com. So can I make a plug real quick, Matt? Do I have your permission to make a plug?
Please make a plug.
So here's my plug. So as Todd and I have talked about putting the podcast together, I've already started in my own mind thinking about all the different people that I would like to do either an audio or a video interview with. I've already started making and collecting articles and ideas and concepts of things that, again, whether it's an audio or a video podcast, of topics that I want to cover. But because you are so customer oriented, the plug that I want to make is for all of those who are listening, that if you have topics, suggestions, individuals, whatever it may be that you want me, it's somebody that you think, oh my gosh, if I could hear Michael Brown interview Donald Duck about whatever it might be, I want to hear about that. Or if there's a particular topic that people have read about that's in the news that maybe that I've glanced over or I've missed it or something, that people think they would like to hear my take on whatever's going on. And it doesn't have to be inside the Beltway. It can be at the state government level, it can be at the local level, it could be at the international level, but some topic. So what I'm asking to do, and I always did this in my radio program also, if you have some idea, there's something that you want to hear about, then I need to know about that. So what I'd like people to do is there's probably 2 easy ways to reach me. One is just to send me an email. And you can send me an email at my business email address, which is Michael, Michael, at michaelbrowntoday.com. That's all one word, michaelbrowntoday.com. You can just send me an email that says, hey, you listened to the podcast with Todd and me, and here's what I'd like to hear about, or gosh, I'd like to hear your discussion about this, or this person. There are always people, I think we always forget, because we all get in our own little cocoon, right? There are people doing amazing things at the federal, state, local level, or at the international level, or even just as importantly, in the private sector, that are doing fantastic things that we never hear about. And the only way we're going to hear about those is if somebody gets in touch with you, or they email me at that email address and say, hey, by the way, I've been working with this small company that does, I don't know, maybe they've got some really unique way of dealing with their supply chain or their vendors during a flood or some sort of disaster. Well, I'd love to talk to those people, but I don't know about that unless you email or tell me about that. So email me, michael@michaelbrowntoday.com, and we'll certainly reach out to those people, and I'll certainly take into consideration anything that you want to talk about. As Todd knows it, and as many of you may know, I've spent the past, 13 years on the radio. So I love talking, and I love talking to people, and I love hearing people's stories about things they've encountered, or things that they had a light bulb go off in their brain either just before a disaster happened or in the middle of the disaster, and they came up with this brilliant idea, but they don't have a platform to share that with everybody else. And we can do that on Bravo Charlie Ready.
That's exactly right. I think from the perspective of the platform, on the podcast page, we will have a big button right next to your name that says contact Michael Brown, and especially with ideas. We will have a message board also, and I think about once a week we'll have a facilitated conversation in the message board. I also see that as a great source for that type of information. And as you know, information that's coming directly from the field is powerful information, because generally it's going to be pertinent information. It's not going to necessarily be dated. And one of our strengths, I believe, is that ability to react to that information in a very, very fast manner. We're not putting it in a pipeline with a committee of 500 people and trying to get feedback and being delayed by real disasters, which I certainly can appreciate that. But when we're trying to roll out curriculum and it takes 4 years, there's a very good chance that some of that information is going to be dated. So we want to go as fast as possible as a small company, certainly, and be nimble enough to react to things. And I think that folks are going to find that to be absolutely not only fascinating, but extremely beneficial.
Well, I'm excited to get started. This was the whole purpose of the podcast today was just to all of you who have worked with the Blue Cell already know Todd. And if you've ever read a newspaper, or you've ever been at some conference and they've talked about Hurricane Katrina or 9/11, you may have heard my name somewhere. And so we just wanted to kind of reintroduce ourselves. And I also wanted to, and again, because I believe that Todd is doing such incredible work with the Blue Cell, if you haven't connected with him on the Blue Cell for training or exercises, that sort of thing, get on thebluecell.com, check it out, get a hold of Todd, because I can tell you based on anecdotes, based on direct stories that I've heard and people I've talked to, he's doing, believe it or not, Todd, I did a little due diligence on you, and you passed the examination. So,
well, you are an attorney by trade, is that not right?
Well, yes, but you didn't have to bring that up. But yes, and like I usually tell people, I know people.
I know people.
I know people. But anyway, I say that in all sincerity, because as someone who, it's near and dear to my heart, even after all these years, that people really have the best information, that they have the best training, and above all, when you talk about exercises, holy cow, you and I need to do another podcast and just talk about exercises. Because As you may be aware, we had, during my tenure, I had gone to Congress to seek funding to do 10 scenarios of catastrophic disasters. And I don't mean the kind of catastrophic disaster, because in the media today, every disaster is catastrophic. And I know that if you're in the middle of a flood or a tornado or a forest fire, that's catastrophic for you. But I mean catastrophic in the sense that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people displaced. The entire grid is down. I'm talking about a true disaster. So we had come up with, obviously New Orleans was number one. We had done another terrorist event, the big one in California, the New Madrid fault, I think a Cat 5 going up the Hudson River. And I'd have to go back and think through my head what the other 5 were. But we received the money to do 5 of the 10 exercises. And we had started by doing a tabletop called Hurricane Pam. If people aren't familiar with Hurricane Pam, that in and of itself turned into a disaster. And
Right.
I always talk to people about when they would say, well, but did the exercise go well? I was more happy when I was able to tell people, no, the exercise went poorly, but that's a good sign because that meant we figured out there were problems and now
Right.
we know the problems to fix. So if
Right.
the exercise failed, unless there were some extenuating circumstances, I actually consider that to be a victory.
That's
So,
right.
so at some point we'll talk about exercises and go into all of that stuff. But for the time being, we just wanted to introduce the Blue Cell and now the Blue Cell's partner page, bravocharlieready.com. That's where you'll find the subscriptions, you'll find the learning management system, you'll find the podcasts, all of that at bravocharlieready.com. So we will, unless, do you have anything you want to add before we close this particular podcast?
No, just Michael, I just want to absolutely thank you. You've been an inspiration and a true partner on this, and we are ecstatic to have you on board with us, and we are really looking forward to the future and doing some great things with you. So I just can't thank you enough, and that's all I would have.
Well, it's a mutual admiration society right now, so we won't bore people with that. But I do appreciate that, and I feel likewise. And I'm excited about the opportunity to talk about things that are still near and dear to my heart. So again, find that button at bravocharlieready.com. Shoot me an email at michael@michaelbrowntoday.com. But whatever you do, somehow get in contact with either me or with Todd, because we're going to take this thing to the next level. You're going to get information that's going to be informative, entertaining, that at times when you're listening to my commentary, I hope that I can change people's perspective, or I can cause them to at least scratch their head and go, oh, gee, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe I should think about that. So whether it's commentary on news, politics, whatever it has to do with Homeland Security, you'll be able to get it at bravocharlieready.com. bravocharlieready.com. Todd, I'll talk to you later, okay?
All right. Thank you.
You bet. Take care.